What's up? This video is about how Wi-Fi devices reserve, receive, use, and defer their access to a shared data transmission medium. Let's figure out what kind of competition all transmitting devices constantly participate in. What timers are there, where they come from, and why they are needed. Let's look at transmission modes, methods of accessing the medium, and working with collisions. We will even touch lightly on Wi-Fi quality of service. There are so many different things there. I'll tell you now, we will reveal all the secrets about how it all works. Let's go. Let's start with transmission modes. These are methods of exchanging information between two devices which are characterized by possible directions of data transfer. There can be three of them, one simplex and two duplex modes. Simplex, this is only in one direction. Half duplex, in two directions but only in one at any time. Full duplex, simultaneously in both directions. The first is used, for example, in optical lines of two fibers, each fiber for its own direction. Wi-Fi works in half duplex mode. Today we will look at it in detail. Full duplex in Ethernet, when we have 4 pairs of conductors and can utilize the bandwidth of a gigabit link in both directions simultaneously. When the signal travels along copper wires, it is very easy for us to isolate pairs of devices from each other by connecting them with cables in pairs. Therefore, if a collision occurs, it affects only two devices, and we say that on a switch the collision domain is limited to one port. The common medium shared by the devices here is one single cable. In Wi-Fi, radio waves propagate in all directions from the transmitter, or not exactly in all directions when using directional antennas. Therefore, when one device transmits a Wi-Fi frame, it will be received not only by those to whom it is addressed, but also by everyone who can hear this frame. In this case, the shared common medium is a very large area of space where all devices operate on the same channel as the transmitter does. And it is necessary that all devices transmit data in turns, otherwise a collision occurs. For this reason, Wi-Fi uses half duplex mode. Transfer is possible in two directions, but not at the same time. Let's remember how the things work with collisions in the Ethernet. The media access method there is called CSMA CD. Carrier Sense Multiple Access with Collision Detection. Carrier Sense means that all devices are constantly listening to a common media. If it is noticed that while one device is transmitting, there is someone else transmitting, then the following thing happens. The devices send a special jamming signal notifying that a collision has occurred. After this, all devices randomly select a certain amount of time during which they do not attempt to transmit, and then they try again. You could say that they roll the dice and delay their transmission as long as it says. Those who got smaller number are lucky and will transmit the data earlier. Very simple. If a collision occurs on the Ethernet, it is not a big problem because usually only two devices are affected and this doesn't happen often. We say that the Ethernet has a low cost of a collision, they are cheap there. Now let's look at Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi uses a different access method, CSMA-CA. Carrier Sense Multiple Access with Collision Avoidance. Before starting a transmission, any device each time selects a pseudo-random Backoff interval and waits a certain number of microseconds. That is, the procedure that occurs on the Ethernet during a collision occurs on Wi-Fi during the transmission of absolutely every frame. This helps ensure that only one device is transmitting at any time. Yes, when there are 50 clients attached to your access point 5 GHz radio, they all and the access point itself strictly take turns to transmit. One speaks, everyone else is silent. The main 802.11 standard of 2020 describes such a thing as DCF, Distributed Coordination Function. It is a set of mechanisms that coordinate access to a shared common medium by multiple devices using the CSMA-CA protocol. In Wi-Fi, each unicast frame must be confirmed with an acknowledgement frame. If the device doesn't receive acknowledgement in response to the sent frame, then a retransmission occurs. which means a re-reservation of the medium, or even a re-reservation of an extra large. These small mandatory complications avoid larger problems that arise in the event of collision. And yes, this doesn't guarantee their complete absence. DCF has four main components. Physical carrier sense helps to understand whether the transmission medium is busy. Virtual carrier sense serves the same purpose. Pseudo-random Backoff timer, we just saw it. It works for a concurrent access to the medium. All devices compete with each other to occupy the channel and begin transmitting their data. Interframe Space, the time interval between the transmission of frames of different types, serves for priority access to the medium, allows more important frames to occupy the medium more likely. Now let's dig into all of it deeper. PCS, Physical Carrier Sense. The main thing to remember about the PCS is the CCA procedure, Clear Channel Assessment, and two thresholds that are used in it, Signal Detect and Energy Detect. Physical Carrier Sense performed by all devices not transmitting or processing the received frame. When a frame arrives at a receiver, the device determines whether the frame is addressed to it. If yes, then it synchronizes the parameters and analyzes all the fields of the frame. If it is not, it ignores it. During PCS, the Clear Channel Assessment is performed with SD and ED thresholds. First, Signal Detect is needed to understand if the received signal is actually a Wi-Fi message. The device looks for a preamble in the physical layer header. This is a sequence of alternating zeros and ones. If this sequence was obtained as a result of demodulation, it means that it wasn't a microwave oven that threw out a portion of radio emission into the air, but someone was intentionally transmitting data via the 802.11 protocol. The signal detect threshold value is the signal-to-noise ratio of 4 decibels. That is, the preamble will be recognized successfully if the receiver hears it at least 4 decibels higher than the noise level. It is interesting to delve into the details of the preamble, but I will not, and I would not advise you to do it unless you are preparing for the Professional Wi-Fi Analyst CWAP exam. It just is there, God bless it. By the way, in the Ethernet there is a preamble as well. The second threshold in the CCA is the Energy Detect threshold. A receiver compares the strength of radio waves in which the preamble could not be detected against this threshold. So it is the threshold for bursts of interference. If it is exceeded, then the medium is busy, but not with a message from another Wi-Fi device, the medium taken by some kind of shit that could not be demodulated. You could try to occupy the medium and perform your transfer in such bad conditions, but the probability of success would be extremely small, and it's better not to show off, but to defer the transfer and try another time. The CCA assessment takes about 4 microseconds. Pretty small, but not the least value we can meet in Wi-Fi standards. The values of these thresholds will vary on each specific device and are determined by the manufacturers. And the thresholds will differ for different types of modulation. And also when using aggregated channels, these thresholds will be different for primary and secondary channels. The main 802.11 standard says that for OFDM, the signal will be recognized with 90% probability at RSSI of negative 82 decibel, which means this is the SD threshold. Here is another table from the standard, with sensitivity thresholds for different types of modulation. The more complex modulation is, the more bits you can put into the parameters of the electromagnetic wave. Therefore, the data rate will be higher. But at the same time, there will be increased requirements for signal strength and signal-to-noise ratio at the receiver. For this reason, all service frames are transmitted at a lower speed, that is, they use simpler modulation, for the receiver could demodulate the message correctly with a bigger probability. This is a gorgeous picture from the internet. The RSSI columns contain the signal detect threshold for different channel widths, number of spatial streams, modulation and accordingly speed, and even a guard interval. For each specific hardware model, receive sensitivity at different speeds can usually be found in the datasheet. Here is how the device thinks when evaluating the medium. If nothing is heard above both thresholds, the medium is free and it can transmit. If a Wi-Fi transmission is detected with a strength above the SD threshold and there is no interference greater than the ED threshold, the device cannot transmit. Its own transmission is delayed and the heard Wi-Fi signal is demodulated. If no Wi-Fi transmissions are detected, but the interference level exceeds the ED threshold, it cannot transmit either. The transmission is deferred. Let's depict this on a picture. Let us have a noise floor of minus 90 decibels. Then the signal detect threshold will be minus 86 and energy detect minus 66. Let's say some Wi-Fi device is transmitting a signal. It will contain a preamble. Assume also that at some moment of time there was a strong burst of interference. There will be no preamble in it. Now we can find zones that match the conditions from our hint. The first line is the signal detect idle and energy detect idle. Wi-Fi transmission does not exceed its threshold. Interference does not exceed its. Let's denote the area up to here with a plus sign. Here the medium is free, we are allowed to transmit. The second line is signal detect busy and energy detect idle. The 802.11 signal is above the threshold, the preamble is recognized correctly and the interference is below the ED threshold. The medium is considered busy, we postpone the transmission, but demodulate the heard frame. Third line, signal detect idle and energy detect busy. Wi-Fi transmission does not exceed its threshold, the environment is free, but the interference burst exceeds the energy detect threshold and we again postpone our transmission. That's all about the PCS, Physical Carrier Sense. Let's move to the next one. The second component of the DCF is the Virtual Carrier Sense, VCS. There are two key points here, duration ID field in the frame header and the nav timer, network allocation vector, which is counted by the device before it begins to compete for the medium. The duration ID field lives in the MAC header and contains the number of microseconds it will take for two things. The first is the acknowledgement frame, that is a confirmation of that frame in which you can see this duration field. The second is the interframe space between the transmitted packet and the acknowledgement for it. We will talk about the interframe space just in a few seconds. So the device transmitting the frame calculates how long it would take for two things to happen immediately after the frame is transmitted. The duration of the unicast frame itself is not included into the duration ID field. The duration field is written with a slash as ID because in case of the outdated battery saving mechanism, PSPO frames, this field is used for a different purpose. In general, now only the duration option occurs. Look, here is a demo frame dump from the Wireshark website. Here we chose a beacon frame and we see 2 words duration in it. The top one equals to 392 microseconds. It is the header that the receiver device added. We ignore it, don't get confused. The duration we are talking about, it is below, in the IEEE 802.11 beacon frame header, that's the MAC header. And the duration here is 0, because the beacon frame is a broadcast, it doesn't need to be confirmed by an acknowledgement. And here is a unicast frame. The duration field here is 60 microseconds. This is how the device tells everyone around how long the medium will be occupied. All devices that hear this frame and are waiting for their opportunity to occupy the medium take this value and put it into their nav timers. The nav timer helps to understand in how many microseconds the medium will be free so that all interested devices can start competing for it. Until the timer is 0, you cannot attempt to occupy the medium. In the figure, Station 1 sends a unicast frame to an access point. The duration field indicates 44 microseconds. All stations around also hear this frame and assign their timers a value from the duration field for not to interfere with the acknowledgement from the access point to station 1. If the acknowledgement doesn't arrive, it will be bad for everyone. Station 1 will have to occupy the medium again to transmit the same frame, and the time that all devices were idle for station 1 transmission will be wasted for nothing. These two carrier sense methods are designed for one single task, to determine whether the medium is currently busy. The next stage is a competition for the opportunity to perform device's own transmission. Let's move on to PBT, Pseudo-random Backoff timer. Here is how it works. First, devices select a random number within the contention window. This is not a timer, this is just a number for now. It is multiplied by the duration of the OFDM slot. It can be 20 microseconds for super old and 9 microseconds for just old and modern standards. The result of the multiplication will be the value of the Backoff timer. It is important not to confuse the Backoff timer with the nav timer. These are different things. The nav timer is the same for everyone who heard the same foreign transmission. The Backoff timer is chosen by every device independently, and it is different for everyone. In theory it should be. Every 9 microseconds all devices decrease the timer value by 9 while the medium is free. If someone else's Backoff timer expired earlier and another device began its transmission, then other devices' Backoff timers get fixed. The heard duration value is placed into other devices' nav timers. Everyone wait for its countdown, and then the Backoff timers resume counting down from the value at which they were stopped. When the Backoff has reached 0, a device can transmit. If the acknowledgement has not been received, although it was expected, all is fucked. It starts again from the very beginning. A retransmission occurs. For frames that are retransmitted, the contention window, the range of possible values for the random Backoff timer, will be increased. And the more unsuccessful attempts to transmit occurred, the higher the maximum contention window will be. This makes the Backoff timer bigger, that is, it reduces the station's chances of winning the medium and transmitting a stacked frame. When the number of attempts for one frame reaches a certain value, the frame is discarded and the output drops counter increases. This is actually useful for example, voice traffic, where discarding a small packet and going next is better than trying to get every frame transmitted at any cost. How many attempts are needed to discard the frame is unknown and depends on many factors. There are some algorithms for this, BBA, BEB, PLEB, but this is just too deep. If you work with what is shown here, then you no longer need this video. It is enough to know only about the exponential growth of contention window. It turns out that the Backoff timer is like in the case of a collision on the Ethernet, dice that the stations throw and wait for as long as they roll. The one with the smallest value wins and takes the medium, the others are waiting. Now the last component of the DCF, Interframe Space. Those are mandatory intervals between frames that take places before the Backoff timer starts. This thing is useful for two reasons. First, a signal that reaches the receiver after being reflected several times will arrive later than a signal arriving directly. If the receiver sends an acknowledgement immediately, then its signal may encounter a reflected copy of the already received signal and get mixed. Therefore, it is better to wait a little. Secondly, AIFS allows to prioritize access to the medium. The point is that not all frames are equal. There is a lot of service data such as beacons, various requests and responses, confirmations, and much more. We would like some of these messages to have a higher chance of taking the air as opposed to user data such as SSH sessions or web traffic. The mechanisms discussed earlier do not solve this problem in any way, they rather aim to provide equal access to all participants. And here is how AIFS resolves this matter. Before the Backoff timer starts counting, all devices must wait even some more time. But the more important the frame to be transmitted is, the less it will have to wait. That is, the length of the interval varies depending on which frame will be transmitted next. AIFS is like a prefix in front of the Backoff timer. There are many types of AIFS, some are presented in the slide. The two most popular are DIFS, DCF Interframe Space, means the lowest priority and accordingly the longest interval. It is used before frames with user data. The second is SIFS, Short IFS, a shortened interval used before acknowledgements or CTS frames. Those are also service frames for controlling access to the medium. The process occurs as described in the picture below the time axis. Station 1 sends a unicast frame to the access point. Then the access point waits for a short CIFS. Then the access point sends an acknowledgement. After it, Station 2 waits for at least a long diffs before transmitting the frame with data and maybe also how much is left of the Backoff interval. If Station 2 was transmitting not a frame with data but something more important, then it would not wait for a long diffs but for some other shorter interval. AIFS is measured in microseconds. It may be short about 910 or bigger like 50. There is no need to learn them by heart, there are too many different options. And this is how all this shit works together. Let's assume that we are a station that wants to transmit something. We follow the algorithm in the picture. First we listen to the air using PCS, and we need it to be free during DIFS. Then a random Backoff timer is generated. By the way, it can be equal to 0, this is a kind of a critical fortune, and in this case there is no need to wait. If another station manages to start transmitting earlier, that is, its Backoff timer expired faster, then we have to postpone our transmission and freeze the Backoff timer value. For how long to postpone is visible in the duration ID field. This is done by the virtual carrier sense mechanism. When someone else's transmission is completed, we wait for another DIFS again, and then we resume our personal Backoff timer countdown. If at the moment when the Backoff reaches 0 the medium is free, then we occupy it ourselves. If an acknowledgement is received, then success, well done everyone. If an acknowledgement is expected but not received, we return to the middle, wait for DIFS, select a new Backoff timer from the doubled range of possible values, and continue trying. Try to imagine that the procedure on the slide is performed by a ton of devices constantly. This entire chain of mechanisms is aimed at establishing as much as it is possible competitive access to the common shared medium. If something goes wrong, then a lot of effort and time will be wasted. This is something we would not want to happen. Therefore, in Wi-Fi it is collision avoidance, not detection. Collisions have a high cost, they are expensive. Cheap collisions are on the Ethernet, and that's why Wi-Fi operates in a half-duplex mode. As a result, even if everything goes without problems, the devices are constantly making a decision. Okay, I'm postponing my transmission. This is the word defer on the slide. But at least somehow everyone is able to transmit what they want. During normal conditions, in more than a half of the entire airtime, no one is transmitting because of these service timers and pauses. There is a parameter channel utilization. This is the percentage of the time during which the radio interface hears transmissions above the signal detect threshold. And if it is equal to 50%, then the network is already considered inoperative for voice traffic. Wow, they really made it complicated, didn't they? Does all of this pandemonium guarantee us the absence of collisions at the end, huh? Of course it does not. Stations can be very far from each other and at the same time consider that the medium is free. As a result, the access point will receive messages from two stations simultaneously. There will be a collision. Stations can choose the same Backoff timer, and they will both transmit at the same time. There will also be a collision. DCF tries its best to reduce the probability of collisions, but unfortunately, they cannot be eliminated completely. Fortunately, although they are extremely undesirable, they are not fatal in the end. DCF was introduced a long time ago, back in the very first Wi-Fi standard in 1997. Its important disadvantage is that all data frames have the same priority. They are preceded by a long DIFS interframe space. In addition to DCF, there was an alternative, PCF, point coordination function, but it wasn't widely used. In 2005, the 802.11e standard was released, an amendment aimed at quality of service in wireless networks. In it, the medium access control function was significantly enhanced. We will not dive into quality of service in Wi-Fi now, this is a large separate topic. We will only briefly touch on things related to the medium reservation. The .11e support is included into the certification from the Wi-Fi Alliance called WMM, Wi-Fi Multimedia. This functionality became mandatory in .11n standard in 2009. The .11e amendment introduces the HCF, hybrid coordination function, which consists of improvements for two access methods from the original standard. PCF, that is not used, upgraded to HCCA, HCF controlled channel access. The DCF improvement is called EDCA, Enhanced Distributed Channel Access. There are 5 key points in EDCA. First, there were introduced 4 prioritization types, in short form AC, in full air condition, alternative you son of a bitch, access categories. It's so good that all the abbreviations are chosen in such a way that they cannot be confused with anything else, thank God. Access categories are kind of traffic queues with different priorities. All 4 of the following EDCA components prioritize access to the medium based specifically on which of these categories the frame falls into. Second EDCA mechanism, AIFS, Arbitrated Interframe Space. Instead of one long DIFS for frames of all traffic types, now frames of different categories wait different amounts of time. More important, voice and video wait less. The third cool thing about the EDCA is that based on the access category, the contention window limits change, which in turn affects the duration of the backoff timer. Number 4. TXOP, Transmit Opportunity, allows to send not just one frame, but several frames at once. Number 5. Call Admission Control or Traffic Specification represents the reservation of bandwidth on the access point for a real-time application data stream. Now a little more about each of those things. Access categories. There are 4 of them, in descending order of priority. These are voice, video, best effort, and background. Voice is more important than video. Which category a frame falls into depends on the QoS label. In Wi-Fi, this is the user priority field in the left picture. In Ethernet, .1 capital D in the picture on the right. The length of both fields is 3 bits. This is 8 possible values, and there are 4 categories. Therefore, each of the ACs is mapped with 2 field values in the headers. Yes, the values for the 2 lower categories are not consecutive. 0 and 3 are best effort, but values 1 and 2 are background. There is a table with examples of traffic that falls under each category. Arbitrated interframe space replaces DIFS interval. For higher priority it is 2 slots, for lower priority it is 3 or 7. AIFS for voice and video in .11e is made equal to the same value as DIFS had before .11e. This is done to ensure that legacy clients are not left completely without access to the medium. If they always have to wait longer, then they would have almost no chance to occupy it. But it's very unlikely to encounter a device that can't do AIFS. Its support has been mandatory for 15 years already. Contention window in EDCA significantly reduces the possible limits of the backoff timer for voice and video packets. From 2 in degree of 10 it is shrinked as 2 in degree of 4 and 3. It is not displayed here, so I will remind you that the backoff timer can be equal to 0. Contention window is the upper limit of the Backoff timer, which grows with repeated transmissions of one frame. CW min is the minimal maximum of the Backoff timer for the first transmission attempt. CW max is its maximal maximum for several unsuccessful attempts in a row. Previously, a voice frame during retries could get stuck for a very long time. And now, even with repeated transmissions, it has a good chance to take the air before the other frames. For the two least access categories, no changes were made here. This is how AIFS and the minimal contention window look together for different categories. So it is the number of slots that must be waited before starting a transmission for stations that support .11e. Under the word Backoff it says SIFS, but this is bullshit, it should be AIFS. We have already gone through 3 EDCA elements, there are only 2 left, hold on. Next is TXOP, Transmit Opportunity. This is the time interval for which the device occupies the medium, and it is allowed to send more than one frame if it has enough time. Definitely a great idea. Each frame has a large overhead due to all this management stuff. Why not to give a station, which was already able to occupy the medium, the opportunity to send more than one frame, especially if they are small? This is just what TXOP provides. If a station transmits several frames during one transmit opportunity, then this is called a frame burst. And between all those frames, a short SIFS interval is used so that the station will definitely keep the air taken for itself and no one will take it over. Over here we have TXOP durations for different frame categories. It is measured in units of 32 microseconds. Note this, the duration for voice, the highest priority category, is the shortest of all. Have you already guessed why? Absolutely. Voice traffic is usually small frequent packets, for example 1 packet every 20 milliseconds. The video is much heavier. 4K, for instance, has 8 million pixels in each frame, which also changed 30 times per second. This approach is only good for voice traffic, giving fat video more time but less often, and for voice, transmit opportunities shorter but more often. The duration of the transmit opportunity, by the way, varies depending on the physical air technology. That is, it is different for some generations of Wi-Fi and for other wireless transmission standards that are not exactly Wi-Fi. This picture is from the new CCNP textbook, and now we will understand why these numbers are here. These are, for example, the values in the old Cisco documentation from 2015. There are some outdated standards here, .11b, A, and also G. This is what the main standard of 2020 says. The actual values are highlighted in yellow and there is a subtitle at the top of the column. For physical air technologies, defined in sections 17, 18, 19, 21. What kind of technology is visible on the left in the table of content? I will now add notes here about what physical layer technology is used in what Wi-Fi standards, for it could be clearer for you. Boom! These technologies differ based on the data transfer rate they provide. Therefore, one Wi-Fi standard can support several technologies, that is, speeds. And vice versa, one item from the content can be included in several generations of Wi-Fi. We can see that the highlighted column includes standards starting from .11a, this is year of 1999. Wi-Fi 6 is missing here because it was published in 2019 and it was not added to the main standard. At the time of the recording, this is 2024, so we can expect an update of the main standard shortly. And now the last element of the EDCA, Call Admission Control, or TSpec, Traffic Specification. This is a thing that reserves bandwidth at an access point upon a request from a station for a data stream of a particular access category. It can be unidirectional or bidirectional, operates based on the current network load and radio environment conditions. If the request is rejected, then the station can postpone the transmission of the stream, roam to another access point, or say fuck off to the priority and transmit in the best effort category. The most important thing you need to know about admission control is that it is supported by a very few manufacturers, and you are unlikely to encounter it. Maybe it is still used in Cisco VoIP phones, they support it pretty much and use ADDTS messages there. Add the traffic stream requests and responses. That's it about the EDCA, Enhanced Distributed Channel Access function. In addition to it, in the .11e, there was also an update for the unused PCF, called HCCA. This is kinda more centralized method, where instead of all devices competing for the right to occupy the transmission medium, there is a distribution occurs on behalf of the control node, apparently the access point. Some contention-free conditions are created where you don't have to fight for the right to send a message, but instead focus on things that are more useful for your business, like its predecessor, HCCA has not been widely adopted. Let's now recap how the EDCA key points affect the work of the good old DCF. Let's list them so as not to forget. You remember 5 pieces, right? Access categories, arbitrated interframe space, contention window, TXOP, and TSpec. 4 categories are like 4 buckets from which the packets are coming. AIFS appears where we have DIFS drawn in this place and over here. Contention window modifies the CW min and CW max limits, affecting the value of the backoff timer. TXOP and TSpec are coming out when a device has already taken the medium for its frame transmission. Oh my, what a masterpiece! Well, that's all about the shaded medium contention. We looked at a lot of interesting, not always obvious, partly contradictional, complex but completely justified things that happen under the hood of Wi-Fi. We figured out the transmission modes, simplex, half-duplex, full-duplex. We found out the difference between 2 CSMA access methods, CD and CA. We have met the DCF components. There are PCS with VCS, nav timer with duration field, pseudo-random backoff timer with contention window, and interframe space. And then we dug into the amendment .11e. There is WMM certification by Wi-Fi Alliance, there are EDCA and its components, access categories, AIFS, TXOP, contention window enhancements, and admission control aka TSpec. And there also were some unpopular alternatives for DCF and EDCA. That's finally it. Thanks for watching, hope you find it useful. Have a good one!